My life had always been a delicate act of balancing family and work. Like many mothers, I cherished my two sons, considering them my greatest pride and accomplishment. My husband, a caring and devoted man, started staying later and later at work, and over time a void grew between us. It felt as though we had become little more than neighbors, unaware of how our lives had drifted apart. My eldest son, Mickey, had just turned 25. Watching him mature from a boy into a capable, intelligent, and strong adult filled me with pride. Yet, I couldn't ignore the bittersweet regret over how quickly the years had slipped away. Mickey and I had always shared a special bond. We often found solace in our conversations, discussing life, relationships, and the struggles we faced. He wasn't just my son. He became a confidant, someone I could share thoughts with that even my husband didn't know. But everything shifted a few months ago when Mickey chose to stay home during his vacation, while my husband and younger son, Jack, went to my parents' house to help with some work. Left alone in the house, I was overwhelmed by a loneliness that seemed to echo the emptiness in my life. That afternoon, I sat in the living room feeling an inexplicable longing, as though something deep within me was stirring, waiting to awaken. When Mickey entered the room, I glanced up at him and was struck by how much he had changed. He didn't just look older. There was a maturity and strength about him that I hadn't noticed before. He sat beside me, and we began to talk. We laughed, chatting about his college life, his friends, and his dreams. But as the conversation grew more serious, I found myself seeing him in a way I never had before. There was something indefinable in his eyes, something that drew me in. Every movement he made, every subtle shift in his tone seemed to captivate me, stirring emotions that were unfamiliar and forbidden. I tried to dismiss these feelings, telling myself it was nothing more than a mother's pride in her grown son. But the longer we talked, the stronger that magnetic pull became. That evening, as we sat together on the couch, Mickey gently touched my arm. The simple gesture caught me off guard, breaking through the walls I had carefully built around myself. My heartbeat quickened, my breathing grew shallow, and I looked up to meet his gaze. His face was calm and serious, but there was an unreadable intensity in his eyes. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked quietly, his voice soft, as though he could sense my inner turmoil. "Yes, of course," I replied, forcing a smile, though my voice betrayed me. We continued our conversation, but I couldn't concentrate. Mickey kept his hand on mine, his fingers warm and steady. At one point, he lifted my hand to his lips, pressing it lightly against them. A shiver ran through me, and every part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I needed to pull away. But I couldn't. That night, as we sat side by side, I felt the cracks in my long, stagnant marriage deepen into an unbridgeable gulf. It was as if something buried deep within me had been brought back to life. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and denial. I tried to create distance between us, pretending nothing had happened. But the harder I tried to pull away, the more the attraction grew, beyond my ability to control. Whenever our eyes met, I felt his presence enveloping me, consuming me entirely. At night, I lay beside my husband, feeling the growing distance between us, while my mind raced with thoughts of Mickey and the emotions I couldn't suppress. One evening, we were alone again. Mickey came to me and draped an arm gently over my shoulders. That simple gesture sparked something within me that I was reluctant to acknowledge. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, and I knew in that moment that everything was about to change. My relationship with my husband had long since fallen into routine, and suddenly, I saw my life for what it was, a series of compromises and self-restraint. Standing next to Mickey, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The strange connection between us seemed to grow on its own, beyond my control. I kept telling myself that it was nothing more than a mother's pride in her son, admiration for his maturity and character. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the feeling of something deeper, something secret and forbidden, refused to fade. It grew quietly, reignited every time I was near Mickey, who always seemed to appear when I needed someone most. We began spending more time together. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, perhaps the moment he came home for his vacation. It felt as though some unseen force was pulling us closer, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't resist it. At first, it was innocent. Conversations, laughter, walks. All of it seemed perfectly normal for a mother and son. But gradually, something intangible crept into those moments, like an invisible thread that transformed our usual interactions into something more. One evening, after another of our long walks, Mickey suggested we look at old family albums. We flipped through the pages, reminiscing about the past. As I looked at him, it was hard to reconcile the grown man sitting beside me with the little boy I had once held in my arms. We laughed at the funny photos, but the more I looked into his eyes, the more uneasy I felt. His gaze was warm and understanding, just as it had been that night on the couch. But there was also something else, something I couldn't define. At one point, Mickey leaned toward me to point something out in one of the photos, and I suddenly became aware of his breath close to my face. His hand brushed against mine, and a sharp, unexpected jolt ran through me. The sensation was so sudden and intense that I almost pulled my hand away, but I stopped myself just in time, dismissing it as my mind playing tricks. "Mom, are you okay?" Mickey asked, his voice soft and distant, almost as if coming from another room. "Yes, of course," I replied quickly, though tension coiled tightly inside me. Forcing a smile, I shifted my attention back to the photographs to hide my discomfort, but it felt as though Mickey could see straight through me. His gaze was steady, piercing, and for the first time I realized it wasn't accidental. After that, I began avoiding him. I found excuses to leave the house whenever he was around, and buried myself in household chores or spent time with my younger son. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape Mickey. He sought me out, visiting my room, offering to help with tasks, or suggesting we go out together. Something was building inside me, something I couldn't control. Every night I tossed and turned, haunted by thoughts I didn't want to have. I remembered Mickey's childhood, the innocence of his first steps, the way he clung to me before bed. Those moments had been so simple, so pure. I had assumed they would stay that way forever. But now those memories were bittersweet, reminders of how different things had become. One night when we were alone in the living room again, Mickey came over and hugged me without a word. His embrace was strong and warm, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. I wanted to push him away, to stop whatever was happening, but I couldn't. Fear of my feelings held me back. Lifting my head to meet his eyes, I saw something in his gaze that shook me, making me question everything. I was torn between my role as a mother and the emotions I knew I shouldn't feel. When I decided to go grocery shopping, Mickey offered to drive me. Sitting beside him in the car, I tried to keep the conversation light, focusing on trivial topics as if nothing unusual was happening. But as the discussion grew more personal, and Mickey began sharing his thoughts about life and people, I couldn't shake the sensation that the man beside me was no longer just my son. His voice carried a confidence and maturity I hadn't noticed before, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Everything about him, his words, gestures, and demeanor fascinated me. When we stopped at a traffic light, Mickey suddenly placed a hand on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch caught me off guard, and my heart raced. He looked at me with an intense, focused expression, as though he was trying to read my thoughts. Something inside me shifted in that moment. I felt an attraction I couldn't deny, and it terrified me. We stopped for coffee at a small roadside cafe. Noticing I was shivering, Mickey offered me his coat. I accepted, though the chill I felt wasn't from the weather. The faint scent of his cologne lingered on the fabric, amplifying the storm of sensations I was trying to suppress. As we sat at the table, our conversation became deeper than ever before. I found myself opening up, sharing my experiences, and the loneliness that had shadowed my life for so long. Mickey listened with an attentiveness I wasn't used to, his gaze holding a warmth that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. When he passed me a cup of coffee, his hand brushed mine, and the touch sent a jolt through me. It felt as though my entire body responded to the contact. I tried to pull away, aware of where these feelings were leading, but Mickey seemed to sense my hesitation. He lightly squeezed my hand, and I caught myself locking eyes with him. We sat like that for a few seconds, that felt like an eternity, and I realized I could no longer pretend nothing was happening. That internal struggle followed me to bed each night, robbing me of sleep as I replayed the moments we had shared. I knew I had crossed a line and there was no going back. The worst part was that I had no idea how to stop this downward spiral. I was terrified to confront Mickey, afraid of destroying the fragile balance between us. At the same time, I was consumed by this forbidden feeling that burned within me. The torment grew so intense that I even considered taking sleeping pills to quiet my thoughts. Then one day, Mickey said something that shattered the fragile wall I had built. "I love you," he said, his voice deep and steady. But it wasn't the kind of love a son usually expresses to his mother. His words pierced through me, stirring feelings I had tried so hard to bury. They brought back memories of stolen glances and fleeting touches, moments that had lingered too long to be innocent. "Mickey," I began, trying to sound calm, but my voice trembled. I searched for the right words, hoping to explain that his emotions were misplaced, an illusion. You're confused. You're young, and you think you feel something different for me, but before I could finish, he interrupted me. He stepped closer, and I saw something new in his eyes. Determination, longing, confidence. No, Mom, he said firmly. This isn't just in my head. I know you feel the same way. You can deny it, but I've seen the way you look at me. A wave of fear and desire washed over me, leaving me frozen. He was right. No matter how much I had tried to deny my feelings, to rationalize them as a product of loneliness or dissatisfaction in my marriage, I knew deep down that something between us had shifted. Too much had changed, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. I stepped back, desperate to create space between us, but Mickey moved closer. His hands rested gently on my shoulders, and the tension in the air became almost unbearable. You can feel it too, can't you? He murmured, his voice trembling with barely contained emotion. I couldn't bring myself to reply. The words simply wouldn't come. Instead, I sat frozen, staring at him in silence, unable to tear my eyes away. The house was quiet. The world outside seemed distant, and in that room, it felt as though time itself had come to a standstill. My head swam, my heart pounded, and I realized I was teetering on the edge of breaking down. This isn't right, I whispered at last, summoning the strength to speak. You're my son, Mickey. It's all wrong. But even as I said the words, they sounded hollow, as though I didn't believe them myself. His embrace tightened, and I felt the tension in his body, his breaths coming deep and fast. What's wrong is denying how you feel and pretending to live a lie, Mom, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, as I felt the light brush of his lips near my ear. A shaky sigh escaped me as I struggled against the storm raging within, a war between my rational mind and the strange, forbidden emotions I was desperate to suppress. I felt as though I was losing my grip, being pulled into a whirlwind of feelings I couldn't control. Just as I felt myself slipping, I found the strength to pull away. Turning sharply, I pushed him back, refusing to let him see the tears that had already begun to fall. You have to forget this, I said, forcing my voice to sound firm. We will never talk about this again. I'm your mother, and you need to understand that. I need to understand that. Without waiting for a response, I fled the room, my heart heavy with despair that seemed to envelop me completely. I knew then that I needed to speak to my husband, that I had to reconnect with him and fill the emotional void that had grown between us. But even as I clung to that thought for comfort, a part of me recognized the truth. The moment Mickey had looked at me with such deep affection, something fundamental between us had shifted forever.